The first thing I heard when the Keth ship entered Earth's orbit was silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that falls over a crowd when something impossible walks through the door. I was standing in the observation bay of Station Callaway, 300 kilometers above the planet I had spent 11 years fighting to keep. Around me, 47 people held their breath. Some of them were diplomats, some were generals. A few were just staff who had wandered in because the view was too important to miss. We all watched the Keth vessel slow to a hover, its hull dark and angular against the blue curve of Earth below, and none of us said a word. My name is Yara Osei, and 3 years ago I fired the last shot of the Keth occupation. I know that sounds dramatic. I did not know it was the last shot at the time. I thought I was just trying to stay alive. The Keth ambassador's name was Athakir. His designation came through the translation bead in my ear as something closer to a title than a name, but his people had given him a human-readable identifier for the summit, and Athakir was what the document said. He arrived through the docking corridor at exactly the time the treaty had specified. Not a minute early, not a second late. His delegation was 6 people. 6. The last time the Keth had sent 6 representatives to a planet, they had been an advanced survey team choosing it for conquest. I had been assigned as the human liaison to his delegation. Ambassador Lyra Shen had made the appointment herself, and she had been honest with me about why. She said that of all the retired soldiers she had considered, I was the one who had demonstrated the ability to hold a conversation without breaking something. I took it as a compliment. Athakir was tall. Most Keth were. They had 4 limbs, the same as us, but the proportions were wrong in a way that the eye kept catching, the way a shadow sometimes falls in a direction that does not match the light. His skin was a deep gray-green, textured like old wood. His eyes were amber, very large, and they moved constantly, cataloging the corridor, the ceiling, the faces of the people watching him. When those eyes landed on me, they stopped. He looked at me for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at the floor. I had been told to expect this. The briefing documents had explained it in careful language, the kind that diplomats use when they want to say something difficult without saying it plainly. The Keth soldiers who had survived the occupation of Earth had returned home changed. Their physicians had no name for what had happened to them. Human psychologists, when they were shown the symptom reports, recognized it immediately. The documents danced around the word, but the word was simple. The Keth were afraid of us. Not in the way you are afraid of a storm, which has no intention. Not in the way you are afraid of a weapon, which is a tool. They were afraid of us the way you are afraid of something that looked at you through the dark and did not run, and did not stop, and eventually came through the door. I extended my hand. In human culture, it is an offer of peace. I knew the Keth would know this. They had spent 11 years studying us, and they had learned our customs faster than we would like to admit. Athakir looked at my hand for a moment. Then he placed his own against it, palm to palm. His skin was cool and dry. "Commander Osei," he said through the translator, "I am grateful that you agreed to this role." "I was assigned it," I said. "Yes," he said. "I know. I am grateful anyway." We walked the corridor together toward the conference rooms, and I watched the way his delegation moved. They kept close to one another, not the loose, confident clustering of a diplomatic group comfortable in their surroundings. The tight, careful proximity of people who were not entirely sure the walls would hold. I had seen humans walk that way, in the first months after the Keth came. It was strange, and a little uncomfortable, to see the shape of that fear on someone else. The formal opening session was brief. Ambassador Shen spoke for humanity. High Envoy Davin Liss, Athakir's superior, spoke for the Keth Dominion. The words were careful, and long, and said very little. I sat along the wall with the other liaison staff and watched Davin Liss the way I had once watched Keth defensive positions, looking for the thing that was not obvious. What I found surprised me. Davin Liss was not performing. He was not giving a speech. He was confessing. The words were diplomatic and measured, but underneath them, if you knew how to listen, there was something raw, something that had not fully healed. He spoke about the occupation of Earth as a military decision made in error. He spoke about the losses his people had suffered. He spoke about the responsibility of the Dominion to acknowledge harm caused to a sovereign people. And when he was done speaking, he went very still and looked at no one. I had been expecting arrogance dressed as apology. What I got was something genuine, and it unsettled me more than arrogance would have. After the session, Athikir found me in the corridor outside the dining hall. He had a small data tablet in his hand and an expression I could not yet read. I would learn, over the following days, to read Keth expressions reasonably well. At that moment, I only knew he wanted to say something he had not said in the room. "May I ask you something directly?" he said. "Go ahead," I said. "Are you afraid of us?" I thought about lying. Then I thought about the 11 years, and the city I grew up in, and my grandmother's street, and the sound a door makes when someone breaks it down in the middle of the night. I thought about the first time I held a weapon, and the last time I needed one, and everything in between. "No," I said. Athikir was quiet for a moment. "That is what I thought," he said. He looked past me, through the long viewport window, at the earth below. "That is what frightened us most." He walked away down the corridor. I stood there for a moment, looking at the planet, feeling the particular weight of being a person who comes from a place that something very large and very powerful decided to stop trying to take. Below, Earth turned slowly in the light, blue and white and impossibly calm from this distance, the way it always looks from up here, the way it never quite looks from inside. I went to find something to eat, and I thought about tomorrow, and I did not feel afraid. I am not sure what I felt, but it was not afraid. Later that evening, Lyra Shen called me into her office. It was small and efficient, the way everything on Station Calloway was small and efficient, because every cubic meter up here cost something, and no one was wasting anything on comfort. She poured 2 cups of tea from a flask she kept on her desk, and pushed one toward me without asking if I wanted it. I had worked with Lyra long enough to know this was how she opened difficult conversations. "They want more than a peace treaty," she said. "I know," I said. "They want to understand us." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Davin Liss made a formal request this afternoon, after the session. He wants human historians, human psychologists, and human soldiers to sit with their delegation and answer questions. He wants a recorded archive." I picked up my tea. "An archive of what?" "Of us," she said. "Of what we are, how we think, why we did what we did." She looked at me steadily. He used the phrase cultural documentation, but what he means is that they want to know what they are dealing with. They want to understand what came for them. I thought about Athikir in the corridor, asking me if I was afraid. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him I would consider it," she said. "And then I came to find you, because you are going to be the one sitting across from Athikir every day for the next 3 weeks, and I want to know what you think." I looked at my tea. It was a very ordinary cup of tea, hot and plain, the kind you drink not because it is special, but because it is there and you are tired. I had drunk 1,000 cups like it, in places far less comfortable than this. "I think," I said slowly, "that they are not here to negotiate. They are here to learn whether they should ever try again." I put the cup down, and I think the most dangerous answer we could give them is an incomplete one. Lyra nodded once, slowly. "That is what I thought you would say." She picked up her own cup. "All right. Tomorrow morning you will begin meeting with Athikir formally. I want daily reports. I want everything documented." "Understood," I said. "And Yara," she said, as I stood to leave. I turned. "Do not smile at them," she said. One of the junior staff smiled at the Keth security officer this morning, and the man nearly left the station. I almost smiled at that. I stopped myself. "Noted," I said, and went to bed. That night I lay in my bunk and listened to the faint hum of the station around me, the sound of systems and life support, and the vast quiet machinery of a structure built to keep humans alive, in a place where nothing naturally keeps humans alive. I thought about Athikir's eyes, amber and wide, cataloging me. I thought about the word he had used, frightened. I have spent a long time around frightened people. Fear has a texture you learn to recognize. It is not always loud. Sometimes it is very, very quiet, and the quieter it is, the deeper it usually goes. Whatever the Keth had come to this station carrying, it was not shallow. I closed my eyes. Outside, 300 kilometers below, Earth went on turning, the same as it always had, which is to say, imperfectly, loudly, and without any intention of stopping. I slept. The next morning would be the beginning of a conversation that I am still, years later, trying to find the right words to describe. Not because the words are hard, because the truth is large, and truth that is too large sometimes needs time to fit inside a sentence. But I will try. That is, after all, what we do. We try. We keep trying. Even when something very large and very frightened is watching us from across the room, wondering what we are, wondering what we will do next. We try. The second morning on Station Callaway, Athikir arrived at the meeting room 6 minutes early. I know because I arrived 8 minutes early, having decided the night before that showing up after a Keth diplomat would feel like a small surrender I was not prepared to make. We looked at each other across the plain table with its 2 chairs, and its single window, and its tray of water and plain biscuits that someone had placed there as a gesture toward hospitality. "You are early," he said. "So are you," I said. We sat down. The first hour was formal. He had questions on a list, prepared by his delegation, covering basic categories: human social structure, human governance, human biological needs. I answered each one honestly, and without decoration. He listened with complete attention, the kind that feels slightly unnerving because it does not waver, the kind that reminds you that not everyone in the galaxy developed the habit of looking away during long conversations. When the formal questions were finished, he set the list on the table and looked at me with those amber eyes. "May I ask something that is not on the list?" he said. "Yes," I said. "I have been reading human history," he said. "Not recent history, very old history, before your species achieved space travel. Before your nations became unified. I have been reading about your conflicts with each other." He paused. "Your people have caused each other enormous harm, over many centuries, many thousands of years, harm of a kind that my people have largely not inflicted on ourselves." I waited. "And yet you survived," he said, "and yet you became what you are. And when we came, you responded with a capability that none of our surveys had predicted, and none of our models had anticipated." He folded his hands on the table. "How?" It was a simple question. It was also one of the largest questions anyone had ever asked me. I thought about my grandmother, Grace Osei, who had told me once that the most important thing she had ever learned was that human beings are very difficult to finish. She said it with a kind of satisfaction, the way someone describes a quality they are proud of even though it has cost them. Her own life had tested that difficulty several times, and she was still here, still cooking enormous meals on Sunday afternoons, still arguing with the radio. "We practice," I said at last. Athikir tilted his head. "You practice suffering?" "We practice surviving it," I said. "They are different things." He was quiet for a moment. "Explain the difference," he said. I picked up one of the biscuits from the tray. I did not eat it. I just held it. Sometimes when I am thinking, I need something in my hands. "When something terrible happens to most living things," I said, "the goal is to stop it from happening again. Avoid the danger. Move away from the source. That is a reasonable response. That is the healthy response." I set the biscuit down. But humans, over thousands of years, developed a different response alongside that one. We began to study the thing that hurt us. We cataloged it. We told stories about it. We painted pictures of it. We wrote it down, and argued about it, and passed it to our children. And our children passed it to their children. We did not just survive our terrible history. We memorized it. Athikir was very still. "And that memory," I said, "is a kind of armor. Not perfect armor. We still make the same mistakes sometimes. We are not, as a species, especially wise. But we have scar tissue in places where other species have open wounds. We have already been through things that would be new for someone else, and having been through them, we are less surprised. We are less broken by them." "Less broken," he repeated. "Not unbroken," I said. "Never unbroken. Just less so." He picked up the water glass in front of him and held it without drinking. I noticed he was doing the same thing I had done with the biscuit, and I did not mention it. "During the occupation," he said carefully, "our ground commanders sent regular reports. I have read those reports. There was a phrase that appeared frequently: across different commanders, different units, different regions of your planet. He looked at me. The phrase was, "They do not behave as expected." "No," I said. "We generally don't." "The commanders expected resistance," he said. "What they did not expect was the duration of it, the persistence. They expected that with sufficient pressure, the resistance would collapse. This is the standard pattern. In 41 previous operations, it was the standard pattern. Pressure builds, the population accommodates, administration begins." He set down the water glass. "With your people, the pressure built and the resistance increased. This was confusing. It was also, in some of the later reports, described as distressing." I absorbed that word, distressing. A Keth military commander, writing in an official report, using the word distressing to describe the people he had been trying to subdue. By the 4th year, Athikir continued, the reports began to include requests for withdrawal. Not requests for more resources, requests for withdrawal. He looked at me with those steady amber eyes. "I want you to understand what that means. In 41 previous operations, no commander had ever requested withdrawal. The concept did not exist in our military doctrine. There was no protocol for it. When the first request came through, our high command assumed it was an error in translation." The room was very quiet. "It was not an error," he said. "No," I said. "It was not." Outside the window, Earth was below us, partly in shadow, the line between day and night drawn across it like a slow breath. I had grown up in Lagos, in the southwestern part of that enormous, complicated, beautiful continent. During the occupation, Lagos had been a target. It was a large city. Large cities were always targets. But Lagos had also been, during those years, something else. It had been a knot that the Keth could not untangle. The people in it simply refused. In ways large and small, at enormous personal cost, they refused. My grandmother had been one of them. She had never held a weapon. She had never needed to. She had run a small school in her neighborhood that became, during the occupation, something more than a school. She would not tell me exactly what. She said only that children needed to know how to read, and that some things are worth reading in secret. I had been 9 years old when the occupation began. I had been 20 when it ended. "What were you, before the occupation?" Athikir asked. It was a personal question. He asked it carefully. "A child," I said. "What did the occupation make you?" I thought about that. The honest answer was complicated. It made me a soldier. It made me efficient in ways I have not always been proud of. It made me less afraid of pain, which sounds like a strength, and is also, sometimes, a problem. It made me the person who could sit in this room, across from the representative of the force that had reshaped my childhood, and speak calmly about it. It made me someone who remembers, I said. That is probably the most accurate answer. Athikir nodded slowly. He reached into his case and removed a small device. Something about the size of my palm, dark and smooth. He placed it on the table between us. "This is a personal recording unit," he said. "My own. Not part of the official archive." He looked at me directly. "I would like to record our conversations. Not for the Dominion. For myself." He paused. "I have children. I would like them to understand." I looked at the device. Then I looked at him. "Understand what?" I said. "What we encountered," he said. "What you are. Why we should not do this again." He did not look away. "Why it would be very unwise to do this again." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, which is something I do when I need a second before I speak. "Turn it on," I said. He picked up the device and pressed something on its surface. A small light appeared. "Tell me about the school," I said. He looked at me, confused. "Which school?" "The school my grandmother ran," I said. "Tell me what your commanders reported about it." "Because I know they reported it. I know they watched it. And I want to know what they wrote down, because she never told me." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached into his case again and brought out a second, larger tablet. He scrolled through it for almost a minute. When he found the entry, he read it carefully to himself first. His expression did not change, but something in his posture did. It settled, slightly. The way a person settles when they are about to say something they know will matter. The report describes a community education facility in the southwestern district of Lagos, he read. It was flagged by local surveillance in the second year of operations as a gathering point for unusual numbers of civilian adults, particularly in the evening hours. A decision was made at the regional level not to close it. He stopped. Why not? I said. He looked up from the tablet. Because the analyst who reviewed the surveillance noted that it appeared to be a primary school, that children were present during the day, and that closing it would create negative civilian response patterns that would complicate ground operations. He lowered the tablet. But that is not the only reason. What is the other reason? I said. The analyst also wrote, he said carefully, and I am reading directly now, the administrator of this facility is an elderly female who does not appear to pose a direct operational threat, and whose removal would likely generate significant community resistance at a level disproportionate to any benefit gained. He set the tablet down. There is a note added later, in a different hand. It reads, "Do not touch this one. She is not worth the cost." The room was quiet. "Do you know what your grandmother was teaching those adults?" Athikir said. He said it gently. "Literacy," I said. "That is what she always said." Among other things, he said, the later surveillance reports indicate that the facility was also a distribution point for information regarding safe routes, resource locations, and communication methods among the civilian resistance network. He looked at me. "Your grandmother was, by our operational definition, a key coordination node for the regional resistance. She was the most significant civilian intelligence figure in the southwestern district. Our commanders were aware of this by the third year." He paused. "They still did not touch her. Because the cost would have been too high," I said. "Because," he said, "they had learned, by the third year, that touching anything your people considered sacred had consequences that no model had prepared us for." I sat with that for a moment. Then I picked up the biscuit again. This time, I ate it. It tasted like nothing in particular, the way plain biscuits always taste, and I was glad for it. Something ordinary in the middle of something enormous. "She is still alive," I said. "My grandmother. She is 83. She lives on the same street. She still runs the school." Athikir said nothing for a moment. He looked at the recording device on the table. "I am glad," he said, and I believed him. We talked for 3 more hours that day. By the end, he had stopped checking his notes. He was just asking questions, real ones, the kind that come from genuine need to understand, rather than from a prepared list. I answered all of them. Outside, Earth turned. The school on my grandmother's street was somewhere below us, in the daylight, probably loud and messy and full of children learning things that would matter long after the lesson was over. I kept talking. He kept listening. The light through the window moved slowly as the station's orbit carried us forward, and I thought, this is how it starts. Not with a treaty or a signature, or a formal declaration. It starts with 2 people in a room, one of them asking, one of them answering, both of them trying to close the distance between what happened and what comes next. It is slow work, but it is the right kind. On the 3rd day of the summit, the Keth delegation made a formal request that no one in the human diplomatic team had anticipated. They asked us to tell the galaxy what we had done. Not confess. Not apologize. Not explain in the careful, softened language that diplomatic documents usually prefer. They wanted a plain account, entered into the galactic record, of every significant action humanity had taken during the 11 years of the occupation. Every capability we had demonstrated, every method we had used, every unexpected thing we had done that had forced them to reconsider their plans. Ambassador Shen brought me into her office the morning the request came through. She looked like someone who had slept 2 hours and spent the rest of the night thinking hard. "They want a full accounting," she said. "Their legal team has framed it as a historical record, something for the Galactic Archive. Shared access. Every species with observer status at this summit will receive a copy." I sat down without being invited. She did not comment on this, which told me how serious the situation was. "Why?" I said. "I asked Davin List that directly," she said. "He told me that the Keth Dominion wants the rest of the galaxy to understand what they encountered on Earth. He said it was a matter of galactic safety." I turned that phrase over in my head. Galactic safety. He means it as a warning, I said. Yes, she said, but not the kind we first assumed. He does not want to warn the galaxy against us. He wants to warn the galaxy not to do to any other species what they did to us. She looked at me steadily. He told me, and I am quoting him as precisely as I can, that if we had understood before we came what we would encounter when we arrived, we would not have come. He wants to make sure that no other civilization makes the same error of judgment. The room was quiet for a moment. He wants to use us as a deterrent, I said. He wants to use us as a lesson, she said, which is not entirely the same thing. I thought about that distinction for a long time afterward. The formal hearing was held on the 5th day of the summit. The chamber was large, the gallery filled with observer delegations from 11 other species, some of whom had traveled considerable distances to be here. The Keth sat on one side, the human team sat on the other. Between us, a neutral table for the record keeper and the translator systems. I sat along the human side, next to a quiet historian named Dr. Owen Hartley, who had been selected to present the human account. Owen was 60 years old, slight, with gray hair, and the kind of patient manner that comes from decades of listening to records of things that happened long ago, and trying to understand them without flinching. He had spent 3 days before the hearing preparing the document with a team of archivists. He had not slept much either. When he stood to read, the chamber went still. He began with the date of the first Keth landing on Earth's surface. He read factually, without drama, in the plain voice of someone recounting a historical record. He described the early resistance, the formation of the Unified Defense Network, the development of signal intelligence operations that allowed civilian networks to coordinate without using communication channels the Keth could monitor. He described the medical teams that operated in areas of active conflict. He described the engineers who reverse-engineered Keth construction equipment to build fortified civilian shelters in under a week. He described a retired biology teacher in the northern part of the European continent who had spent 2 years developing a substance derived from locally available organic materials that interfered with Keth's sensory organs without causing permanent harm. She had worked alone, with equipment that had never been designed for that purpose, and she had shared her findings with the resistance network through a communication method that I will not describe here because it is, even now, still classified. He described children, between the ages of 8 and 14, who had served as couriers carrying information through areas of active occupation because Keth security protocols at the time assigned low threat assessment to small humans, an assessment they had been forced to revise in the 3rd year. He described a fishing community on a large island in the Pacific who had modified their vessels over the course of 18 months to carry equipment that disrupted Keth navigational systems within a 12-kilometer radius. They had done this without any formal military training, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations about the behavior of currents, tides, and the particular way certain frequencies move through salt water. He described the adaptation rate of the human military. In standard Keth doctrine, a defending force could be expected to adopt countermeasures against any new Keth technology within approximately 14 months. The human military had been doing it in 3. He described the psychological operations program. I will not go into detail here either, except to say that the Keth military command had eventually issued a directive that no soldier should engage in direct conversation with a human civilian for more than 2 minutes without authorization from a commanding officer, because the conversations were having measurable effects on troop cohesion that their command structure had been unable to explain or prevent. Owen Hartley read for 2 hours and 14 minutes. He never raised his voice. He never used the word victory. He never said anything that was not on the record. When he finished, he looked up at the chamber. He looked at the Keth delegation. He looked at the observer gallery, where 11 other species were very quiet. "This is not a complete record," he said. "It is a representative sample. Many actions from this period remain classified. Many were performed by individuals whose names were never recorded, because they did not consider the recording of their names to be important." He looked down at the final page of the document. "What is recorded here represents a fraction of what occurred. We estimate, conservatively, that for every action in this document, there are approximately 6 others that are not represented." He set the document down. "We are not presenting this record as evidence of our superiority," he said. "We are presenting it because we were asked to. We are presenting it because it is true. He looked at the Keth side of the table, and because we believe that truth, even when it is difficult, is more useful than silence. The chamber stayed quiet for a moment after he sat down. Then something happened that I had not anticipated, and that no one in the human delegation had been briefed to expect. A representative from one of the observer delegations stood up. I did not immediately know which species they represented. They were smaller than humans, with a bluish cast to their skin, and very dark, deep-set eyes. Their translator bead produced a voice that was low and measured. "My people," they said, "were subjugated by the Keth Dominion 22 years ago. We did not resist the way these humans did. We accommodated, because accommodation seemed like survival." They paused. Listening to this record, I find myself experiencing something I do not have an easy word for. I believe the closest human word is grief. They looked at Owen. "Not for what you suffered, for what we did not do." The chamber was still. "We wish," they said quietly, "that we had been the kind of people who would have done these things." They sat down. I looked at Athikir across the room. He was looking at the floor. His hands were folded in his lap, and he was very still, and I could not tell what he was feeling, but I could tell he was feeling something large. After the session, I found Owen in the corridor, standing by a water dispenser, drinking from a cup with both hands around it, the way people hold cups when they need something steady. "How are you?" I asked. He thought about it honestly before answering. "I keep thinking about that species," he said. "The ones who spoke." He looked at his cup. "We talk about what we did as if it was strength, and it was. But there is another angle to it. Those people accommodated, because accommodation was a reasonable choice given what they knew. They were not wrong to try to survive." He looked at me. "We were not right because we were brave. We were shaped by 10,000 years of being unable to cooperate with being told to stop. That is not a virtue we chose. It is a thing that happened to us." I thought about that for a moment. "Does that change what it means?" I said. He considered this seriously, which is the only way Owen considered anything. "No," he said at last, "but it changes how we talk about it." He finished his water. "We should be careful, Yara, about describing ourselves as something worth becoming. We are something worth understanding. That is not the same thing." I stood there after he walked away, holding that thought the way I had held the biscuit 2 days earlier, turning it over and looking at it from different angles. Worth understanding. Not worth imitating. Not a model. A data point. I went back to my room and wrote it down, because Owen was right, and some things need to be written down before they can be fully believed. That night, for the first time since arriving at the station, I dreamed about Lagos. Not the occupied version, the one before, and the one after. The loud, bright, arguable, alive version. The streets full of people who did not need the galaxy's attention to understand their own value. I woke up and looked at the ceiling and thought, we are going to be all right. I did not know yet exactly what all right would look like. But I had learned, from 11 years of evidence, that not knowing the shape of something does not mean it is not coming. We were going to be all right. The morning after the hearing, Athikir came to our meeting room earlier than usual. I found him already seated when I arrived, a full 12 minutes before our scheduled time. He had not brought his formal case. He had only the small personal recording device, placed on the table between us like a question. I sat down. I poured water for both of us, because the tray was there, and the motion of doing something ordinary helped settle the particular kind of tension that had been building since the previous day. "Yesterday was difficult," he said. "Yes," I said. "For you?" I looked at the water in my glass. "In a different way than it was for you." He nodded, once. This was a gesture he had learned from watching humans over the past several days. I found it odd and touching in equal measure. "I want to ask you something personal," he said. "More personal than before." "All right," I said. "What do you want?" He held my gaze. "Not what your government wants. Not what the treaty requires. You, personally. What do you want to come from this?" It was a good question. It was the kind of question I had not been asked since arriving at the station, and sitting with it for a moment felt like standing up after being seated for a long time. Something shifted and then settled. I thought about my answer carefully, because Athikir was asking it carefully, and he deserved the same in return. "I want to go home," I said. He waited. "I want to take the transport back to Lagos and walk down my grandmother's street and have lunch with her at that table in her kitchen that wobbles on one side because the floor has always been uneven and she has always refused to fix it." I paused. "I want to know that the next time something lands on Earth, it will land because someone wants to trade or share information or ask a question, not because they have decided that we have something they want to take." Athikir looked at the table. "And if something lands that intends to take? Then we will respond the way we respond to that," I said, quietly, without heat. He was quiet for a moment. "That is what I expected you to say," he said, "and it is exactly what makes our High Council afraid." He looked up. "Not the words, the certainty in the words, the way you say it without raising your voice." I had not noticed I had said it quietly. I thought about that. "We do not perform confidence," I said. "We stopped needing to, a long time ago." He picked up the recording device, held it a moment, set it down again. "I want to tell you something that was not in any report," he said. "It is my own observation. From before I was a diplomat, I was, before this role, an analyst, strategic assessment. I spent 4 years analyzing the occupation of Earth in real time, and I was part of the team that wrote the recommendation to withdraw." I had not known this. Nothing in his file had mentioned it. "We wrote 6 drafts," he said. "The first 5 were rejected by the High Council. They were rejected because the Council believed our data was wrong. They believed there was an error in our modeling. They could not accept that the data was accurate, because the accurate data required a conclusion that had no precedent." He looked at me. "The conclusion was that the occupying force was losing morale faster than the civilian resistance, that our soldiers were breaking down faster than your civilians were." The room was very still. "Your civilians," he said, "not your military. Your civilians, the ordinary people who were not soldiers, who had no training, who had no formal role in the resistance. Those people were more stable, over time, than our trained military personnel." He shook his head, slowly. "We had no model for that. We could not explain it. The closest our psychologists could come was to suggest that your people had a relationship with suffering that ours did not, one that allowed you to endure at a level that should not have been possible." I thought about Owen's words the previous evening. Not a virtue we chose. A thing that happened to us. "It is not a gift," I said. "What you observed. It is not something we would have chosen." "I know," he said. "That is perhaps the most frightening part." He folded his hands on the table. "You did not choose to be what you are. You became it across a very long time, through a great deal of pain. And what you became, as a result of that pain, is something that my species, which has had a much less painful history, simply cannot match." We sat with that for a moment. "Does that seem unfair to you?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "I think fairness is the wrong measure," I said. "What happened to us across our history was not fair. What the Keth did to us during the occupation was not fair. What happened to the species in the gallery yesterday, the ones who wished they had resisted differently, was not fair." I looked at him. "Fair is not a feature of the universe. It is something we try to build into our own systems, and we do not always succeed. But trying to build it is still the right thing to do." Athikir was quiet for a long time. The station hummed around us. Outside, through the window, I could see the edge of the planet, the bright curve of it, catching light. "I have something to tell you," he said, "and I need you to hear it as what it is, which is an acknowledgement, not an excuse, not a diplomatic statement, an acknowledgement." "All right," I said. "We knew," he said, "by the end of the first year, that we had made an error, not a tactical error, a fundamental one. We had looked at your world and seen the signs that we had been trained to recognize as indicators of a population that would accommodate conquest. We saw your conflicts with each other. We saw your inequalities, your divided governance, your long history of internal disagreement. We interpreted those as weaknesses." He looked at me directly. "They were the opposite." I did not say anything. I let him finish. "Everything we read as a sign of fragility was in fact evidence of resilience. You had argued your way through centuries of crisis. You had survived conflicts that would have ended civilizations with less practice. Your divisions, your difficulties, your habit of disagreeing loudly and continuously, Those were not flaws in your species. They were the training. He stopped. We did not understand what we were looking at. And then we landed, and we found out. I picked up my water glass. I held it. What will you do with that? I asked. We will change how we classify civilizations, he said. We will stop using conflict history as a negative indicator. We will add a new category to our assessment model. He paused. Our analysts have already proposed a name for it. A civilization with significant internal conflict history and continued cohesion should be classified as high resilience, unknown ceiling, meaning, do not approach without significant cause and extreme caution. Unknown ceiling, I said. We do not know how far you can go, he said. We have seen what you can do when something takes from you. We have not seen what you can do when no one is trying to stop you. He looked at Earth through the window. That is perhaps the most interesting question in our current strategic assessment. I looked at the planet too, blue and ordinary and alive. We are going to do something remarkable, I said. Probably, eventually. We are that kind of people. I looked at him. But the first thing we want to do is sleep in our own beds and eat food we recognize and argue about things that do not matter and let our children be bored on summer afternoons. We are remarkable, Athikir, but we are also exhausted, and when we are done being exhausted, we will decide for ourselves what to do with the remarkable part. He looked at me for a long moment. I will put that in the record, he said. Good, I said. We talked for another hour. I told him about Lagos in the years before the occupation. He told me, unexpectedly and without prompting, about his own children, 2 of them, young, curious, at an age where they asked questions he could not always answer. He showed me an image of them on his personal device. I looked at the image for a moment without saying anything, because what I felt was complicated, and I was not ready to put it into words. They looked, in the image, like children. That is the most honest description I have. They looked the way children look everywhere, across every species, when someone they trust is taking their picture. A little uncertain, a little pleased, a little too full of the present moment to think about what the picture will mean later. They are lovely, I said, because they were. He put the device away. He looked at the table. I hope, he said, that what we do here, these conversations, the record we are building, I hope it means they never have to know what an occupation feels like. That is what I hope too, I said. Not just for his children, for mine, for my grandmother's students, for the children on my street, for every child on every planet who deserved the chance to be bored on a summer afternoon, without something coming to take that afternoon away. We finished the session. He walked out. I sat in the room alone for a few minutes, looking at the window, at the edge of the planet. Then I got up and went to find Owen Hartley, because I needed to talk to someone who understood that history is not only what happened, but what we choose to carry forward from it, and Owen was the best person I knew at making that distinction. A year after the summit, I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in November. The table wobbled on the left side, the way it always had. The tea was strong and plain, the way she always made it. Outside, the street was doing what it always did, being loud, being alive, being entirely unconcerned with the fact that anyone had tried to silence it. My grandmother, Grace Osei, 83 years old, poured herself a second cup and looked at me across the steam. You look like you have been thinking too hard, she said. I have been writing, I said. Same thing, in your case. She sat down and settled into her chair with the comfortable authority of someone who has sat in the same chair so many times it has become part of the furniture, the way the wobble in the table has. What are you writing? My account of the summit, I said. What happened there? The conversations. She nodded slowly. She did not ask who I had spoken to. She already knew, broadly. I had told her when I returned. And how does it end? She said. I thought about that. I have not decided yet. She sipped her tea. Then you have not finished thinking. Outside, a child ran past the window, visible for 1 second, gone in the next. Somewhere nearby, a radio was playing a song I half recognized, one of those songs that feels like it has always existed, that sounds like it was there before you were born and will still be there when you are not. I met his children, I said. Not in person. He showed me a picture. She raised her eyebrows slightly. The Keth diplomat. Yes. I looked at my cup. They looked like children. She made a sound that was not quite agreement, and not quite surprise. The sound of someone who already knew this. They always do, she said. That is not an accident. I looked at her. What do you mean? She was quiet for a moment. In the particular way she was quiet when she was organizing something she had thought about for a long time, into a shape that could be spoken. Everything that was ever done to us, she said, was done by someone who had parents. Someone who was a child once. Someone who did not, when they were very small, understand yet what they would do when they grew up. She wrapped her hands around her cup. And everything we ever did back, every act of resistance, every stubborn refusal, everything you did and everything I did, was done by people who had been children, who had carried the thing forward from when they were small. She looked at me calmly. The question is never whether the other side is human. The question is what you do with the fact that they are. I sat with that. The treaty had been signed 6 months after the summit ended. It was, as Lyra Shen had predicted, more generous than anyone expected. The Keth had agreed to reparations, substantial ones, in the form of technological exchange and resource access, things that would matter for a generation. In return, humanity had agreed to share certain information from the occupation period, medical advances, engineering developments, things that had been developed under pressure and turned out to be genuinely useful outside of that context. There were people on Earth who believed we should have asked for more. There were people who believed we should have asked for nothing and simply established a position from which the Keth understood not to approach. Both groups had made their arguments loudly, in the way humans always argue, which is to say with complete sincerity and no consensus. Ambassador Shen had told me, the day before the signing, that she had spent her career watching people fail to reach agreements, and that this one felt different. Not because of the terms, she said, but because of what had changed underneath the terms. Something had shifted in the room during the summit. She could not point to the moment. She thought it had been slow, like most real changes are, a gradual movement towards something that had been impossible a year ago, and was only barely possible now. I thought the shift had started with Aethekir's recording device on the table. The small light that came on when he pressed the button. The question he had been recording the answer to, not for governments or archives, but for 2 children who needed to understand what their parent had encountered and why it mattered. 2 other species had formally requested alliance arrangements with Earth after the summit. Not military alliances, something they had called knowledge partnerships, a framework for exchange, for conversation, for the slow accumulation of understanding between civilizations. The Venn Collective, who had spoken in the gallery, had been first. A second species, the Marathi, had sent a formal inquiry through their nearest diplomatic contact with Earth, 3 months after the summit closed. Owen Hartley had been the one to receive the Marathi inquiry. He had sent me a message about it that simply read, "They want to understand us." I wrote back, "What did you tell them?" He replied, "I told them that would take a while." He then replied again, immediately after, "I told them we had time." The morning light was moving through my grandmother's kitchen window, the particular October light that falls through that window in the late morning, warm and slightly angled, the light I grew up with. I had missed it in ways I could not fully explain during the years when other things had priority. "Tell me what you told him," my grandmother said. "The diplomat." "About what?" "About us." She looked at me over her cup. "You said you had conversations. What did you say about us?" I thought about all of it, the 11 years in that one room, the things I had described, the scar tissue, the memory, the habit of carrying things forward, the school teacher with her biology experiments, the fishing community with their frequency-disrupting vessels, the children running messages, the way resistance increases with pressure when the people being pressured have already been through worse. "I told him we are difficult to finish," I said. She smiled. It was the smile of someone who gave you the right answer a long time ago and waited to see when you would remember it. "That is what I told you," she said. "Yes," I said. "I know." She refilled my cup without asking. Outside, the street was doing what it always did. Somewhere, the child who had run past the window was probably already somewhere else, already running towards something new, already collecting the moments that would, in some form, become the material of who they would eventually be. I looked at my grandmother's hands around her cup, the hands that had run a school through an occupation, that had never held a weapon, and never needed to, that had made this table feel important in ways no wobble could undermine. I thought about Athikir's children in the photograph, the uncertain, pleased look. I thought about the Venn collective representative in the gallery, saying we wish we had been the kind of people who would have done these things. I thought about Owen in the corridor, saying we are something worth understanding. All of those things were true. The full, complicated truth that does not resolve into a single sentence, the kind of truth that lives in the space between all the things that are true at once. We were worth understanding. We had been difficult to finish. We carried everything forward. We had learned to survive our own worst moments, not by becoming immune to them, but by building something durable out of the surviving. We were not the galaxy's model. We were not the galaxy's heroes. We were the people who happened to be home when something came for what we loved, and we responded the only way we knew how, which is to say completely, and at considerable cost, and without stopping. And now the galaxy knew our name. Not the name we chose for ourselves. The name we had earned by being exactly what we were when tested. My grandmother put her cup down and looked at me with the expression she had given me my entire life, the one that means she already knows what I have just figured out. Write it down, she said. All of it. While you still have the feeling of it. I will, I said. Write the ending first, she said. That way you know where you are going. I thought about the ending. The one that was not about victory or dominance, or the satisfaction of having been right. The one that was about the table with the wobble, and the street outside, and the tea, and the child running past the window, and the two alien children in a photograph, looking uncertain and pleased in the way of children everywhere. The one that was about what we chose to do once the immediate danger had passed. Not vengeance, not conquest, not the performance of strength, the quiet, difficult, absolutely human decision to take the terrible thing that had happened and turn it into something that might prevent the next one. For ourselves, for those vain collective children who had grown up in an occupied world and wished things had gone differently. For Athikir's children, who deserved to grow up understanding what their parent had learned. For the child running past the window, who did not know yet what the world had done to the people who kept it for them, and who would probably not understand the full weight of it until they were much older, which is exactly how it should be. I picked up my pen. We are not the monsters the galaxy feared, I wrote. Then I stopped, looked out the window, thought about the things that are true, the full and complicated truth. I kept writing. We are the species that looked at our own monsters, learned their names, lived alongside them for thousands of years, and decided, slowly and imperfectly, to become something else instead. We did not eliminate the monsters. We did not pretend they were not there. We kept them. We keep them still. They are part of us. They are the reason we are difficult to finish. But they are not what we are for. What we are for is the table that wobbles, the tea that is always plain, the street that will not be quiet, the school that stays open when someone tries to close it, the child running past the window toward something new. What we are for is each other, and the long, imperfect, loud, continuing project of trying to deserve that. We were asked for forgiveness. What we gave was something harder, something more honest. We gave the Keth the truth of us, the full truth, the parts that are frightening and the parts that are ordinary, the history that made us, and the present that we are choosing. We gave them the chance to know us, and knowing us, to understand why this particular road leads somewhere that no one wants to go. They begged for forgiveness. We responded the way we respond to most things, not with the answer that was easiest, with the answer that was true.